Panelists, we're just waiting for one more speaker, but and some other, I believe, attendees as well. Sabina and Richard, my colleagues, and myself will be leading the webinar, introducing speakers and going through the objectives of what we aim to do with the webinar. It's going to be a bit more interactive than the previous SEEV4-City webinars that we did earlier in May. But perhaps Richard and Sabina, are you happy that we start?
Thank you, Jason. Yes, I believe that we can start, or do you want that we wait a bit?
No, I think we could start now. So just a bit of housekeeping. The webinar is being recorded. Please post your questions and comments, suggestions in the Q&A. Polis will be used as the main validation. Polis will be used as the main validation method. And participants will receive a link, including presentations after the webinar. Sabina, would you like to go through the objectives quickly?
Yes, please, if you just go to the next slide.
Sure. All right. Too far.
Okay. So good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of the SEEV4-City consortium and me, Jason and Richard, to this webinar. I think that we should not, let's say, doubt the fact that the electrification is coming our way. Now, when talking about electrification, we also have to think about the sustainability aspect of it. And each is trying to look for this, but our, let's say, solution would be V2G and smart charging. At least in this webinar, this is something that we would like to discuss with you. And what would we like to achieve? What our objectives of this webinar is to really trigger your interest in smart charging in V2G, to give you the main ideas, the main pros and cons of the solutions, to share with you the lessons learned in terms of the upscaling and procuring of the smart charging infrastructure. But also very important is to validate the policy recommendations. The document has been shared with you yesterday. We hope you had the chance to look into this. Today, as Jason correctly mentioned, through the polls, we would seek your validation and also try to enlarge or mainly to validate the recommendations. That's the main idea. So yeah, if we go to the agenda, I'm having some trouble seeing. Yeah, okay. So mainly today we will be splitting the webinar in 3 parts. The first part is really the idea of this part is to make to set the scene, to explain you how we came actually to V2G. Anna Dominic from IMED will be mainly focusing on the white paper that they produced last year and share with us the recommendations of this paper, talking about the accelerating towards more sustainable societies and the transition, the energy transition in electrification. Then we will continue with Robert van Hout from the University of Applied Science in Amsterdam, and he will be presenting the benefits of the smart charging infrastructure as they were identified within the SEEV4-City project. And then we have a speaker, also a coordinator of the CleanMobilEnergy, Hugo Niesing from Resourcefully, and he will be mainly talking about the implementation and upscaling of the smart charging infrastructure and what are the barriers and drivers that he had encountered or that can be encountered and expected when innovating with these solutions. The second part of the webinar will be focusing on us presenting the recommendations themselves. We will focus mainly on the European, national, and local and regional recommendations based on the document that you have received yesterday. The idea is also to launch the polls, so you could vote. You also have to understand that the polls are anonymous, so don't be shy to vote. And then we go for a break. Before we have, after that, we have Jordan van der Hoort from CEMIX in Netherlands, who will explain us actually what are the key takeaways and the lessons learned when procuring the smart charging infrastructure. And at the end of this webinar, we hope to conclude with your inputs, and we will also present you the next steps for this policy recommendation document. Without further ado, I would say we can start with our first speaker, Anna Dominic, and then Anna, if you could start sharing your screen.
Yes.
That would be great.
I will stop sharing my screen.
Yeah.
Okay, do you see it?
Yes, we see your screen, Anna.
Yeah. Perfect. Okay, so just to briefly introduce myself, I am Anna Domenech. I am charged for managing innovation partnerships at Nissan Europe, and I am also leading the IMET initiative within the EIP Smart Cities. IMET stands for Intelligent Mobility for Energy Transition, and the EIP Smart Cities, for those that don't know it, is a stakeholder platform that was launched by the European Commission some years ago, and it aims to support the deployment of their smart city strategy by fostering the creation of public-private partnerships. So speaking of European strategies, I am sure you all know that European Union has set ambitious policies to fight climate change. The plan is to become the first climate neutral continent by 2050. And cities will play a key role to achieve this objective because actually they are responsible for roughly 70% of the greenhouse gas emissions. So to really cut these emissions, urban areas will need to modify not only the way they consume energy, but also the way they generate it, which we also call it energy transition. And we rely on smart cities technologies to support this change, to support the energy transition. Open collaboration among the different actors within energy and mobility sector will be extremely needed to accelerate this transition. And this is why on 2017, Nissan launched the IMET initiative, which brings together a range of these stakeholders, representative from energy and mobility sectors. And our aim is to, by one side, launch pilots that demonstrate the positive impact of intelligent mobility in our society. And by the other side, to create a friendly environment for these solutions to be implemented across Europe. When we speak about intelligent mobility, in this context, we basically refer to electric vehicles, second life batteries, and vehicle-to-grid systems. As this is a complex and relatively new issue for everyone, in order to clarify the role these technologies play in supporting a clean energy transition, we have developed a white paper taking into account inputs from all relevant stakeholders which are represented by more than 20 members from IMET. The paper presents a holistic view on this topic and issues a call to action for key blockers to be addressed. Let's crack on. How exactly can intelligent mobility support a clean energy transition? Well, while I'm confident that most of you are aware of the benefits of electric vehicles in cutting emissions, it's also true that we all know that they are not the whole solution. They are only part of the solution. We should, in fact, aim to decarbonize, besides mobility, the whole energy system. We should tackle, as I said before, energy generation and energy consumption, because they must take place together in order to be effective. The overall concept behind IMET initiative is that by expanding the use of electric vehicle batteries for energy storage, we could add more flexibility to the grid, and this would enable further integration of renewables into the grid, which would finally make our energy mix greener. Okay, so I mean, the generation would be more sustainable and consumption would follow. When speaking about energy storage, we refer to two solutions you can see in this slide. First one is using second life batteries from the electric vehicles as stationary storage systems that are connected to solar panels. This enables and support self-consumption. Second solution are the vehicle-to-grid services. These services allow electric vehicles to be used as mobile batteries because the vehicles are able to transfer energy back to the grid, so they can use the batteries for supporting self-consumption again, or sell back the energy that is remaining to the grid, so that in periods of high demand, there is more energy available. This would generate either savings or revenues for the consumer. You may understand now how intelligent mobility can reduce the stress on existing infrastructure, which will in turn reduce upgrade investments and improve the grid resiliency. I hope I clearly summed up how electromobility can become a relevant tool to support energy transition, but in order to enable all this to happen, we need first to remove some blockers in the way, and this is what I want to talk now about. What is blocking us from getting here? Overall, this transition requires a rethink of energy infrastructure and regulatory frameworks. First of all, if we start from this part of the slide, the big round here, a fundamental blocker is the digital immaturity of the existing energy infrastructure, because these innovative technologies need real-time communication between devices, operators, and utilities, and the current infrastructure simply doesn't support it. This is something very important, but in addition, we have uncoordinated policy visions and regulatory blockers that are also undermining our intention to support energy transition. Because even if so far climate ambitions in Europe go in the right direction, many of the related strategies lack of clear and coordinated guidance to support the contribution from other stakeholders, such as industry or local governments. Just to give you an example of what I mean also by regulatory blockers, I would like to speak about the disharmonization of energy frameworks amongst countries. In certain member states, it's not possible to share energy back into the grid, it's forbidden. In other member states, it is possible to do it, but this operation can result in double network charges for consumers because the network does not differentiate between energy being consumed or fed to the grid. So the network just thinks everything is energy being consumed and they charge it double. So Next blocker, also important, is that regarding investment, the challenge is these technologies are very costly and require long-term investments in significant reskilling of employees. This takes time. This is risky. These are two adjectives that don't fit so well in the current investment climate, as you can imagine. Something to solve as well. And there's still not enough EVs on the road. EVs are still a small fraction of the total fleet in Europe. Uptake of electric vehicles is hampered by their high price by one side, but also because there's an uncertainty over the related public incentives, because often they are unclear or not so consistent. In addition, there is the rent anxiety problem, which is still there. Still is a barrier for many citizens that could go for electric mobility. And finally, I'd like to stress that there is a general lack of awareness regarding how we can all make a positive contribution to the energy transition, and how electric vehicles will not be one of the problems, but could actually be a very feasible solution. Now, let's become a bit more positive. So how can we address those blockers? In our white paper, we issue a strong call to action to authorities to address these blockers, and we structure it in 6 recommendations. I will go quickly through all of them, although I very much encourage you to read the paper online, because, well, it's a very nice one, and you will have much more detail on all that. So first, let's go to first recommendation. It's absolutely imperative that we combine policy power to properly integrate energy and mobility frameworks, because these solutions fall in the crossroad between energy and mobility. So we need our policymakers to adopt a coordinated approach when working on a friendlier environment for these solutions. Second recommendation refers to the decentralization of the energy system. This decentralization will encourage consumers to adopt technologies for energy storage or distributed generation, because it will be finally possible for them to benefit from positive business models. And this brings me to the third recommendation, because actually consumers are the key drivers. They are our key partners here. So we definitely need to empower them to become active participants to the system. Next topic, supporting scaling up. Well, to effectively scale the benefits of promising technologies across the region, government and authorities should provide increased and more targeted public support. Not only to support pilot projects as they are doing, but more importantly, to support later commercialization of the solutions. And speaking of public support, I go to the next recommendation, because public incentives, financial and non-financial, are very much needed to increase the rate of electric vehicles in the industry. Reaching 100% electrification of mobility also needs more and more development of charging infrastructure. And this is why public incentives should also focus on that. And last recommendation, that's our main topic today, is that, well, we are speaking about infrastructure right now, right? So we're all aware that more EVs on the road means more electricity demand. This is why smart charging is critical to address energy transition. Authorities should prioritize and mandate the integration of these technologies across Europe in order to optimize energy management. Thanks to smart charging, the impact of so many EVs connected to the grid would turn into an opportunity, not a burden, as many people are afraid of. So, well, I will stop here. I feel I could talk forever about this topic, but you are lucky I promised to make it short. Also, I am looking forward to listen to the next presentation, because it will also provide more further details about smart charging. Well, I hope I was able to provide a good summary of the paper, but please, again, do read it on the website. Feel also free to follow up with us via email, and you are all welcome to join IMET initiative if interested. So, as I said, I give the floor to Robert van Hoort from the University of Applied Sciences in Amsterdam, and looking forward to hearing about smart charging details. Thank you all for your attention.
Aiko, mau si bos.
Iya, kan Aiko.
Hah? Gak ada satu menit tetap permanen pensu.
Thank you.
Sabina, Jason, should I take over?
Yes, please take over the screen. Meanwhile, I would like to thank you, Anna, for her presentation. Yes, do not hesitate to look into the white paper. It is very informative, and I see there is one question in Q&A box, but I propose that we wait for the presentations of Robert and Hugo, and then we take the questions for all three speakers together. Does this work?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. Okay. Robert, the floor is yours then.
Thank you, Sabina. So Robert van den Hoed from the University of Applied Sciences, Amsterdam. Be talking about the benefits of smart charging and vehicle-to-grid technology. And in these discussions, you tend to get a lot of questions about all kinds of smart charging practices which you see around, which differ quite distinctively. So what can we discern as the variables in smart charging? I'll be talking about that. Second of all, the benefits of smart charging and vehicle-to-grid are also not a one-dimensional thing. There's different types of benefits you can get. So the two things I will do is provide a bit of a classification of smart charging practices. On the other hand, a classification of the type of benefits and optimization goals they want to reach. Before I do that, I will just give a few short background on the SEEV4-City project, the project where we learned about smart charging and vehicle-to-grid in more detail. So the three main lines, three main drivers for us to start this project, SEEV4-City, was first this whole renewable energy market, which is booming very fast. So just looking at solar, you see the increase in installed power. Solar is really moving towards mainstream markets. It's becoming the new normal in a way. So that's one of the developments, is really driving solutions for how do we use it, how do we harness it, how can we buffer it. Second, of course, is electric mobility, which is clearly further from this tipping point than solar, but is also really taking off with growth percentages worldwide of 15 to 20% a year. So that's really coming fast towards us. We hope this continues during the Corona crisis, but it's going fast as we speak, and that means that creates an extra electricity demand within our society. On the other hand, it provides an opportunity to start storing electricity within vehicles, so where there's all kinds of synergy effects you may be able to reach there. Third of all is the interface between the two, or let's say the interface between household energy, vehicles, and renewable energy generation. And that's where smart charging comes in. So vehicle-to-grid technology, there's more developers providing new technologies which enable cars to charge smart, but also maybe to decharge towards the household and maybe to the energy markets. So that's becoming more viable. And these three elements led us to develop the SEEV4-City project in 2016 with the principal idea of looking at the household energy peaks or the energy demand in a given country, with a morning peak and an evening peak. And in orange, you see the extra demand of EVs. And what you would technically ideally like is in the morning to flatten the curve, to use that capacity which is available, maybe lower the curves in the evening and the mornings, maybe even use the vehicle to provide some extra electricity to the grid or the household, and during the day maybe charge during the times when it's sunny. So this is the basic idea which we have, and that requires to think about smart charging technology or vehicle-to-grid. And that has led us with a consortium of 11 partners to start a project which is ending, actually just should have ended. This is actually outdated. We're running 2 or 3 months, we're postponing it And we've got 11 partners to carry this out in 6 pilots, where we actually have these smart charging and vehicle-to-grid in operation and in operational pilots on different aggregation levels, varying from households to stadiums and even cities. So that allows us to do a lot of cross-case analysis and learn under which circumstances it may make sense and in which sense it's difficult to realize and make it attractive. So, second point, the 2 points I want to make is about the smart charging. The second is the benefits. Let's first talk about smart charging, because there's a lot of operational pilots, a lot of pilots with smart charging, which differ considerably. So the dimensions we see in smart charging is three things: duration of the session, speed, and the direction of charging. So first is duration, or time. When do you charge? Normally, dumb charging, so to say, non-smart charging, you would plug in and the car would start charging right away. But you can postpone that in a relatively non-smart way, but also maybe you can cut and divide the session in small pieces. Second is you can lower the power. The charging speed is a variable in smart charging, which you see in all kinds of pilots around smart charging. And then the third, which is the vehicle-to-grid dimension, you can change the direction. You could not only charge your car, but also discharge. So in every smart charging project you come across in the media or in your vicinity, in your country, you may want to ask the question, in which dimensions is this smart charging project varying from others? So that helps maybe to discuss that. And there's a number of parameters you can look at a charging session, which may help you devise about 3 or 4 strategies, which you can discern in all kinds of pilots around the world. You see the connection time, start connection and end connection in the bottom part. And you see the starting time and the actual charging time, which is the covered area, the gray colored area, surface area. And then vertically, you can depict the power. Now, the higher it is, the more power you're charging. And then you can really start to look at, what kind of smart charging strategy are we looking at? So first smart charging strategy may be a simple postponement strategy. And here you see it on the top is the non-smart charging, and then on the bottom you see we're just replacing the start connection to a later time, or postponing it with a few hours. You may do that, for instance, in the evening to reduce the net impact, or you may want to do that in the morning to increase the number of or the percentage of renewable energy charged to the vehicle. So that's a simple postponement strategy. A little bit more smart, I would say, is to cut and divide. If you've got this session, which may take maybe 2 or 3 hours, and you say, well, I want to split it and reschedule parts of it across the time of the complete duration of the charging session, because we know that in a lot of cases the connection time is much longer than the charging time. So you see that depicted here. Then the third one may be just slower charging. Slower charging is basically reducing the amount of power and then increasing the amount of time to fully charge your car. So you see that in the bottom depicted. And the fourth is then the direction part, where you basically say, we start charging, but at some point we want to discharge the car and provide energy back to the grid or your household, because it's in need of that, because there's a peak, and then later on we'll catch up. We'll start to charge the car when it's possible again. So these are the 4 main, let's say, categories you can think about, the 4 strategies around smart charging and vehicle-to-grid, which may help to start categorizing what kind of smart charging strategy we have. And conceptually or ideally, your charging session in the future may look like this. And this may seem very extreme, but in the end, actually, there's 1 or 2 projects we're actually doing exactly this: charging, discharging, different speeds, which all basically benefits particular optimization goals. So let's talk about these optimization goals. If you look at the left, you've got these smart charging strategies from postponement to vehicle-to-grid. But what can you do with it? How can it benefit you or a charge point operator or other parties? So what are the optimization objectives? Well, the first one, which is, I think, probably in most smart charging practices is most commonly used, is you can really reduce the peak load. So it's about net congestion and reducing net impact by applying smart charging. And as I mentioned, the postponement strategy is a good example. by not charging between 7 and 10 in the evening, or 5 and 8 maybe, you're really reducing the extra impact you create in the evening times. And maybe slower charging is also a good example of that, which we have applied in a project called Flex Power Amsterdam. The second optimization objective may be CO2 emissions. That's also a common one, which is used in a lot of cases, where you try to optimize the charging profile with the renewable energy generation profile. So better matching sunny periods with actual periods where you want to charge. And that can be done basically by postponing, but also maybe cut and divide. Basically saying we know or we predict that there will be sunny periods coming up. We know we've got a long connection time coming. So we basically cut and divide our strategy. So that's an opportunity as well. The third optimization objective, which we commonly see, which we see in a lot of projects, is energy autonomy. Basically allowing to be more autarkous in, for instance, a building or a household, or maybe even at street level, neighborhood level, which you basically say we're charging at these moments where there's availability, and we use the buffer of the battery and even provide this buffer back to the grid. So vehicle to grid is a typical example of how you can create or increase your energy autonomy. And a number of projects have shown that within the SEEV4-City projects in Loughborough and Kotter, for instance. And the last one is maybe economics as well. We know for a fact that electricity prices can vary over day by 15 minutes, depending on the country you're in. And so you may be able to cut and divide your charging session and really optimizing the cost of charging by aligning the cost curves with your charging demand. So that's another one. And for instance, the Arena project in Amsterdam has done exactly that in a number of ways. And there's actually much more opportunities to trade the charging capacity and the capacity of the buffer battery to create, to monetize that in the energy markets. There's all kinds of ways to do that. So basically, this provides you an overview how you can probably categorize every smart charging project you see in both the smart charging strategy applied and which optimization objective you have. And for the SEEV4-City project, the 3 optimization objectives of net congestion, CO2 emission, and energy autonomy have been the center of the project in a way. Now, having said that, there's no consumer involved. So to finalize my presentation is smart charging, yes, it can be very interesting on a number of aspects, but we should not forget the user. One of the assumptions here is that if you ask a consumer what you would like most, a lot of consumers will say, I want a full battery, so just charge and it's full. That's not completely true, because there's others who have a sustainability incentive, but it's a difficult optimization criteria. What you want to create is the boundary conditions that, yes, you want to optimize for instance, economics or energy autonomy, but also know that if you disconnect and you want to start driving, you know your battery is full, or at least full enough. So that basically provides an overview. I don't know if there's any questions, but that's the end for me.
Thank you, Robert. Very comprehensive. I would suggest that we actually, instead of taking questions now, go to our third speaker, Hugo, and then we can kind of group all the questions together after these 3 speakers.
That's fine.
Hugo, to share your screen. You also need to take yourself off mute. Perfect. We can see your screen. You are still muted though. No, I will unmute. No.
Okay.
No, we can hear you now.
Is it good? Do you also see my presentation? Do you see the PowerPoint on presentation modus or not?
Yeah, we do.
Okay.
Well, it's not on power. It's not on presentation mode, but we see it. You need to make it full screen still. Try clicking again. There you go. Now it's.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Good. Well, good afternoon. Thank you very much. I'm going to talk about the about the policy lessons that we have been drawing from another project, which is very much in line and building also upon the SEEV4-City project. Yeah, my name is Hugo Niesing, and together with Robert, we have started the SEEV4-City project, and well, until now, closely involved with the project. And well, it has been a very interesting journey. I think we've seen a lot of things which makes the integration of vehicles in a electric city ecosystem working together with renewables a challenging, but also a field which still requires good examples, policies, and upscaling efforts. So I'll give you a very short layout on Resourcefully as a small transition-driven consultancy. We do innovation projects and we guide governments in their transition on both electricity and heat provision on a city district basis. And that city district basis also came through experiences from the SEEV4-City project, and this project, what I'm going to focus on now, that's the CleanMobilEnergy project. Basically, the idea is common for both projects. I mean, what we would like to see is well, focusing on the urban environment, an urban environment where energy and mobility does not pollute local and global our environment. So there we invest in clean mobility and we invest in energy generation.
Your microphone seems to be just a bit fuzzy. Maybe just lean back a bit. I'm not sure if that would help.
Okay.
Yeah, that's perfect.
Well, okay, thank you. I will intend to stay back a bit. So what we do see, and that is also in line with the nice graph that Robert showed, is that you see an increase in local made energy in cities. That's for the big majority solar, as it's nicely integratable in a city environment, while other sources, whether it's wind or water, are more difficult to, or biomass to integrate in a city environment. And we see a push for electrification, and in the case of the Netherlands, it's only mobility which is being electrified, but also the heating of the built environment, houses, but also offices, industrial areas. So, and the consequence of these changes is that we do see an extreme energy production. When you look to solar during the midday, when you look to consumption, it's at the end of the day or the beginning of the evening. And in an optimal situation, you would like those two to coincide as much as possible. Well, in the CleanMobilEnergy project, what we have been doing is looking to the technology. What kind of technology is there where you can control storage in warm water, electric vehicles? What kind of devices are there? How to steer those within one neighborhood? In each neighborhood has a different characteristics. A residential area has different characteristics from a center or a more education or enterprise-driven area. And what are the elements, and can they be steered to optimize as much as possible your locally made and locally taken energy. Well, that did not exist. And within SEEV4-City, we looked mostly to the combination of e-mobility and a house, or e-mobility and a company, until the big storage systems in Norway and in Amsterdam in the arena. And here we have taken up the challenge to develop a tool which knows what the demands is of different devices, when the production is going to, and how much it's going to produce on a couple of days to a day ahead situation, creates scenarios, and then tries to balance these things out. Now, the approach that we have been taking is that 4 cities that you see here, Nottingham, London, Schwäbisch Gmünd, and Arnhem, they joined forces, and they joined also their wallets, because they said, okay, we're going to invest in a system which, after the development, we will apply in our respective cities. Now, in Arnhem, it is a distributed situation where you have on a big solar field, we have a big harbor, we have all charging stations from the city, all with their own entries and technologies of their energy provision. And in Nottingham, it's one depot with one entry of energy, where they do maintenance works, where they have a electrical fleet, they have their own solar panel and storage. And the other, London and Schwäbisch Gmünd, are also divided over these 2 typologies. But there is a big difference, especially taking into account the actual policies, when you have your control behind your meter, or when you have to energetically optimize the consumption of devices which are not your property, nor are they behind your energy meter. That means that you get different financial and different operational requirements, which make it harder to align them in a renewable energy optimized setting. So this picture we already discussed a couple of times. We see more solar, more clean mobility, more electrical heating, and this is the figure from a residential area, where you see the solar peak in the middle and the other 2, and you would like to align consumption towards the production, which with more and more and innovative and clean storage will become more and more reality as well. This is a picture which visualizes the complexity and the amount of different buildings and different energy producers, consumers, or storage, which basically would all need to have an intelligent center where predictions, monitorization, interventions are being controlled to see if you can achieve the objectives which are focused on having as much of your clean energy also consumed on the proximity of the source. Now, very short, this is Arnhem. Left up, there is a big solar field, and right up there is a cruise maintenance harbor, and right below there is the infrastructure for the public charging stations, which is being managed by Allego. And in the middle there is a battery. This battery has been delivered now in April and will be put into work, I think this month or July. But in order to optimize the functionality of this battery inside the system of Arnhem, we did some analysis on both the harbor and the EVs. And the biggest flexibility is found in the almost 200 charging stations in the city of Arnhem. Here, there is a profile over the whole week of the consumption of the stations. You see a first peak when people arrive to work, and you see a second peak when people come home at the end of the afternoon, beginning of the evening. The only place where you do not see that are Saturday and Sunday, which is obvious because there's far less work in the weekend. When we have an examination of these charge profiles, we can see two very outstanding profiles, the pillow profile and the work time, as the other graphs also indicated. And both of them are providing possibilities for either better uptake of the local renewable or taking out that extreme peak in the early evening hours. Now, here we visualize in two graphs the situation when you do nothing, you charge as you come, and the one below is the one where we do flexible charging in the morning for the office chargers, and in the evening you see that the extremities around 6 to 8 are replaced into the further into the evening. The battery will be able to feed 90% or to contribute to reaching 90 to 95% of all charging sessions in the city of Arnhem, either directly through solar or, as Robert also demonstrated, through delayed charging, or through feeding the surplus into the battery, releasing that in the evening hours when the pillow chargers and the others which do not have too much flexibility require charging their vehicles. And that's an interesting figure. So now we are in the negotiation with Allego and with the builder of the solar field to not only do this exercise based upon electrons, but also based upon energy contracts. Then the barriers come up. I remember when we started the Flex Power project in Amsterdam, that it was very important to align the objectives of the 4 key stakeholders. And there we had the grid operator, the Dutch grid operator, the municipality, the University of Applied Science, and we had the charge point operators. And everybody had a clear drive and a motivation to do this exercise. And now in Arnhem, this is a process that we're still in, because the builder and exploiter of the solar park gets best funding when all the electricity is injected into the grid. So having the storage on their side would cost them money, but that is not very logic. Another big problem is the grid connection. The DSO in the Netherlands has not the flexibility to push for a best grid connection for, in this case, a wind and a solar park, because when there is extreme production, there is curtailing needed, and there is no clear mechanism to the cost of this curtailing, which happens very, very little, a couple of percent of the production time of the solar will also overlap with the wind. Thereby, 2 separate connections have been made, and that results in a virtual congestion, because on paper all grid capacity is used, but in reality this will not occur, and that is a pity, because thereby you're going to have over-dimensioned infrastructure which is not valid, but you cannot change that actually into a more logic and realistic usage of your grid. Another very important, more generic policy thing is that energy at this moment is taxed, and the end user, and that end user can be at home or it can be the EV driver in a public charging station, does not get any financial payback if the energy is made in the proximity or when it's made using clean sources. That is a real important way to get this industry going. And I would say, let's please do our best to do this at a European scale, that this business of having locally made energy, locally consumed, either into buildings, heating, or mobility, that is promoted, because we make our air cleaner. We do things in a society responsible manner, and that should also be rewarded in a way. So this is a couple of very practical things that we are now encountering when negotiating with a solar park exploiter, with the charge point operator, or with the electricity contracts from a shipyard, for example. There is no incentive for cleaner or more local, say, use less the grid way of consuming your energy. Another very interesting thing, and here we are also looking at different scales. If you want in a neighborhood to control energy, you want to have some security in your building where you have your company or where you live, but that there is also an excess when the company is not active and there is a lot of energy. Who can decide over that energy? So who can control within the built environment, but also between the built environment, when to use or to store or to accelerate certain use? Who is the aggregator? That is still a very a vague debate. The grid operator is not allowed. The energy provider might be allowed, but might have other interests than well, reducing consumption or having it as smart and as socially justifiable divided. So this is something which at the huge markets is existing and functioning, although it's always focused on price and less on how much it contributes to the well-being of our planet. So, but within a city and within a neighborhood, this is an open debate. We are now involved in a couple of initiatives which really look in different neighborhoods on experimenting with this. But before this is also in accordance with existing policies and can be practiced in such a way, that might still take a while and needs very, very good examples. And I think that both the SEEV4-City project, I mean Flex Power from the Netherlands and the from the municipality, and but also the storage where loads of batteries get a second life in order to provide clean balancing of the grid, are very inspiring and nice pilots. But what we would like to see is that these pilots gradually transform into viable business models. And that is something, yeah, I really think therefore we need, yeah, improved policies, and not only for electric vehicles, but also looking where do they get their fuel from. And yeah, I think we really need to get that maybe into the policymakers working at green deals, or no, opening the eyes that we need to incentivize cleaner technologies in one or the other way. And energy management is I think very, very important, because if you have a good monitoring system, by default you're reducing about 15% of not relevant consumption. And when you optimize your production and consumption, it's also something which we would like to see replicated and upscaled from a couple of devices in a neighborhood to all electricity devices to cities and region level. I think that that's the quest that we're working on. And hey, I see my colleague's mail is in the last slide. Now that was my last slide. And I'm thanking you very much for from a very, very, very warm, and I'm in a tropical t-shirt, Amsterdam. Thank you
very much, Hugo. I will now take the opportunity to, I guess, invite just Robert back onto the stage, to answer some of the questions we have in the Q&A. Unfortunately, Anna had to leave, but we can answer questions regardless without her. Like one of the top questions we have, or one of the most voted questions, is how do you see the business case for V2G as compared to smart charging? I guess you both can input on this.
Robert.
Oh, Robert, you're on mute.
Very good. Always good. Classic, I would say. It's the $1 million question, right? So on the cost side, we know that the business case is very negative for vehicle to grid, because simply the technology is still much in development. We don't have a lot of developers, products on the market, only a few. Competition is relatively low and scale is low. So on the cost side, I think the technology is really, vehicle to grid technology is still far behind. And smart charging technology can be implemented relatively easy, although also there you need some both hardware and software and firmware updates. So it's not that it's on the cost side, it's not nothing. On the benefit side, I would say smart charging reaps the benefits already quite quickly. You cannot get all the benefits. Vehicle to grid definitely can increase the opportunities for trading on the energy market. But I guess at least in the next couple of years, 3 to 5 years, I would suspect that smart charging has a more attractive business case. And this is also part of the results we see in the SEEV4-City operational pilots. One last point of vehicle to grid, which is an important factor, is the battery degradation. And UNN did excellent work on that. University of Newcastle, Northumbria, I should say. They did excellent work on that, and you're degrading your battery slightly by every cycle you do, and we know that battery degradation is reduced. The batteries are getting better, but it's something to consider as an important factor in the business case.
Thanks, Hugo. I see you're moving around, but do you want to input on that at all?
Sorry.
Jason, if you want me to move like Hugo, we can make it really, really interactive.
You get a bit dizzy.
Yeah, maybe, Jason, maybe I can come in just a little bit as well, because I thought in both, more so in Hugo's, but also in Robert's presentation at the end, or in the contribution there, one of the dimensions was energy efficiency. Basically, none of what we're talking here negates that you need to have energy efficiency gains. and that can actually also help your business case. The other one is, what really do you mean by business case? Does it have to be profitable? Does it have to be affordable? Over what return time? Is it actually something which pays off once you actually internalize costs which are otherwise externalized, environmental costs or societal costs? And that really has to be brought to the plate, I think, before you talk. And that is what Hugo, I think, also talked about. Business cases look different, even for the same setting, for different stakeholders. So you will have to square that and negotiate and find some sort of multiple optimization model where everyone can live with it and has a stake in that and get some benefits. The other one, finally, is, and I think Robert and his team has done really good work on that in Amsterdam, is if you're talking about logistics or taxis, it's a different proposition again from other types of vehicles. And I think Anna had something in there which is worth stressing out, and that I think will come later on again, that you have a social policy dimension in here, namely access to mobility and access to energy, which is affordable. Otherwise, what, and Robert mentioned consumers, what kind of consumers do you going to get? Only really the ones which you take along who can, for now, reap the benefits, afford it, or have the right policy framework that they get some sort of financial benefit for them, and you leave everyone behind in a society where mobility, energy, and actually now digital access, which is part of the system you explored, is actually absolutely critical to get around, so to speak, and so on. So, you know, all of these dimensions cannot be forgotten if you talk about both a business model and what you mean by that, but also most certainly by the policy environment.
Thanks, Richard. I just want to, we're running quite short on time, but I do want to ask one more question that I thought was quite poignant. There's a model that engages hearts and minds of all consumers, will accelerate the drive the political and business will to amend and update regulation and process. So do any of you know of any ongoing campaigns to engage the general public in smart charging or V2G?
There's plenty around, and basically they've been going for 5 to 10 years, and most of the time people build that in, and that's really why you should have a psychologist and a sociologist on the team. It's about framing. How do you explain it? What is it for? And how do people join it? So how do they become active in the process? And if you like, shape part of the journey and not just get whatever environmental, economic, mostly environmental, some other benefits for them, which get presented for them if they're lucky. Actually a journey where they can co-create and where stuff is as transparent in an easy enough way that even kind of non-engineers can understand that, or non-computer geeks and so on, that they say, yes, this I think is a vision, a prospect which has some trade-offs maybe in it, but on the balance overall, it's kind of a fair deal, and we need to do it. And here is where I can see and find my way into it, and I can stay in it without going, you know, being penalized and going bust myself.
I think it's an interesting question because I'm not aware of public campaigns in a broad sense, right? They're trying to create awareness about the importance of smart charging towards EV drivers. What we technically see, what we do see, is that a lot of smart charging practices are quite considered about how consumers will react, and will carry out some kind of consumer or user analysis and use these pilots we have, either from 20, 50, 100 or a few thousand cars, to use this pilot as a public, as an awareness campaign, basically, to provide them information of the importance of it, and then get feedback on what kind of conditions it would be worthwhile. So in effect, the projects are now the awareness campaign at this moment, but there's no broad national, in the Netherlands at least, not a broad national one. Then again, it's going to be very important to create that create that awareness, and we should consider that it's not easy for EV drivers to understand what's going on with this charging, because if you start charging, you have no clue. If you've got a very smart charging pole, you actually have no clue what's going to happen, how fast your car will be charged. So we need more transparency in this charging. And there's one project in Amsterdam, which is about the transparent charging station, which gives you much more feedback and information. I think that's the kind of direction we need to go into. So big work to do there on the consumer side.
Yeah, of course. With that, I would actually like to jump right into our next session. And that is actually going to discuss the policy recommendations from the SEEV4-City pilots. So further to what Hugo was talking about, how we need kind of EU level recommendations, I'm happy that I can kick off the session with providing more insight into how the EU can help support smart charging and B2G. And generally from our side, what we push and what we see now, the opportunities at EU level is on the first side, harmonizing kind of existing energy and mobility plans. This, for those of you who may not know, are kind of the SUMPs, the Sustainable Urban Mobility Plans, the SECAPs, the Sustainable Energy Climate Plans, and just these general energy planning, the SEAPs as well, of course, that kind of support the member states in planning their kind of general mobility plans for cities in general. And if we can harmonize those together, you really have a bit more integration and kind of synergies that you can have throughout the different stakeholders who obviously are working in different scopes, and especially having got a better transport and energy sector integration, which kind of leads us to the next point about the clean energy package implementation. For those of you who don't know, the clean energy package was kind of a major piece of policy, a variety of pieces of legislation that happened in the previous kind of commission that really looked at reforming electricity markets, supporting the energy efficiency and renewable energy targets at EU level, and then more relevantly, it is now aiming at kind of supporting the prosumption or allowing people to consume energy more effectively, and then to get them kind of remunerated, or let's say better tariffs that will allow them to be remunerated and be kind of incentivize them to push the load or change that kind of load structure that we always see in these graphs about consuming your electric vehicle charging in the night period rather than during the day. So trying to incentivize them with these different tariffs, like time of use tariffs. And on the more industry side, kind of have DSOs, distribution system operators, kind of connect and engage with this charge point operators so that there can be better energy planning in line with that first point about harmonizing existing energy and mobility activities. And now more, I would say, currently with the European Green Deal that we have on the table, there comes some strategies now that will look directly at kind of sector integration, such as the strategy for smart sector integration that will look not just at the energy and transport sectors, but the digital sector as well. But we really feel that, and this is something that's come now in 2020, that will push kind of the integration of these sectors and force kind of stakeholders to engage with each other to realize the potential of both CO2 savings and kind of the benefits of electric vehicles for the overall energy system, which is again, overall aspect of the SEEV4-City project. We also expect the strategy for sustainable and smart mobility to support these goals as well. And specifically that one piece of legislation, the AFIT, the Alternative Fuels Infrastructure Directive, would ideally look at how we can support public infrastructure and potentially semi-public infrastructure to have both smart charging capabilities, and then where viable, where kind of there's been a cost-benefit analysis, a potential to install bidirectional chargers in public environments as well, so that we really can get consumers in the public environments to engage in this kind of smart charging and vehicle-to-grid technologies. and not just, you know, expand past the project phase and expand past kind of the commercial phase. The VAT, the directive revision, and more of the, specifically the energy taxation revision, is more about kind of how we can support the taxation, removing the double taxation of bidirectional charging. So consumers who in the future may want to engage in this activity, currently it's, you know, you're charged double the amount of taxes, and you know, obviously that shouldn't be the case. If you're going to consume energy and then feed it back into the grid at a later time, you should only really be taxed once. And that's kind of a huge barrier that we see currently in the market, and we hope will be reviewed in the energy taxation directive. And then lastly, there's this whole overarching question of road transport being an ETS. This obviously being much more of a broader topic and indirectly impacting the whole smart charging vehicle to grid topic. But you know, with potentially included this in the emissions trading scheme, you have either the potential to greatly clean up the sector, or, you know, it could be a barrier that allows, let's say, more polluting fuels to you know, compete in a transports ETS kind of system. And that's why you really have to get something like this right. And from that side, it's really important to assess whether that's actually the right decision, or to keep just what we have currently as a CO2 emissions limit for kind of fleets within the EU. I'll now hand over back to Richard to take us through the national level policy recommendations.
Yeah, you've seen the document, so I'm just going to pick some out here. If you go to the next slide, Jason, or otherwise I'll do it verbally. So basically, well, to start with, your country may not be in the European Union, where I speak from, in the UK, or you might follow it quite closely, certain kind of regulations in Norway, but not fully. So basically, you may need to have in lieu, but hopefully not conflicting, if you win in the EU, a national roadmap, which is clear enough on the integration of all of these different sectors, and has a long enough time horizon to help people invest, prepare, and reap some benefits from return on investment. And I think from the project here, we probably support that you have smart energy management, which is integrated in the digital system with enough privacy, data security and privacy built in. And that really needs to be done now in order to allow planning which is actually enabling the infrastructure system and the other strategies which you want to execute. And then the next one at the national level, next slide, is yes, so it's a systems approach really which you need to do. Currently, of course, there's connections between the different parts of the European electricity markets and so on. So some of the rules are the same for some coupling of countries and transmission and so on. But there's also clear differences. So you may need to do at the national level significant work around legislation and policy to actually enhance the flexibility of a whole range of different types of loads, which can be controlled, can feed in, which can optimize, and the kind of costs around that, particularly to avoid congestion or avoid grid reinforcement now or delayed for the future around peak demand in particular. Next one. Next slide, Jason. That's the final one then.
Yeah,
and basically what you see often now still is that you have a lot of subsidies or incentives or tax exemptions in part, but they are quite often targeted one of these two to three different sectors or different elements in there. And what really we propose, we would advocate, is you actually build package incentives which go across, where you actually target what you would like to see across these different sectors: mobility, energy, decarbonization, and perhaps the smart digitalization. And that should be done to all of the stakeholders who want to move. Yes, consumers, but also public authorities, local authorities, and so on. And then you have also two at the bottom, you have two things to ponder, if you like, is if V2G, the economics of V2G are not quite there yet fully, although they may not be that far off. We'll see in research demonstration programs, when you have significant aggregation, we'll see what actually the results are in the end at a larger aggregated scale, but maybe you actually have for a transition period to establish a tariff which actually supports the takeoff and the upscaling. Or also energy autonomy is mentioned, maybe you can play a little bit round with benefiting battery energy storage a little bit more to capture more of the solar energy. So these are things which I'm sure at federal or national or subnational level, different countries might look at, and there's complicated political and taxation and law systems within countries, never mind just the European Union. And that was the national one. So it's over to Sabina for.
Yes, I will present the local and regional level. So it is split in three parts. To start with the strategic planning. Cities and regions, we also can see from both projects, SEEV4-City and CleanMobilEnergy, should and can act ambitious, showcasing the possibilities while creating spillover effects, both to the other cities, but also to suburban and rural areas. But how can they do this when it comes to V2G and smart charging in general? Through the strategic planning. That's the first thing that we consider being very important. We have to consider long-term, integrated and agile approach. What does this mean? Create clear and smart and ambitious plans. That doesn't take away that the long-term objectives cannot be split in intermediate steps, but you need to know where you want to be in a longer term. We will say what is also important is the willingness and the room for mid-evaluation and improving along the road, and that it is this agile planning what we mentioned here. It is the willingness to readapt and readjust where needed in order to get to these long-term objectives correctly and on time. What we see a lot on the city level is a very active maybe work within the departments, but no interdepartmental or cross-cutting way of working. So avoid working in silos, but instead couple the sectors where relevant. Local and regional authorities in particular should consider setting up cross-cutting task forces within their municipalities, ensuring both vertical from one side and horizontal alignment and exchange. This approach, we believe, will allow a harmonized way of working and also reduce the danger for process to become exclusively political or business driven. Besides the cross-cutting cooperation within the municipalities, companies, organizations, you also have to consider close cooperation between private and public stakeholders along the entire supply chain. That goes from the energy providers, charging solution providers, consumers, public authorities. We have talked already about the fact that consumer needs and consumer requirements are key for this development. Also in this, let's say, as it is for the cross-cutting task forces here, we believe that the close cooperation between public and private stakeholders will allow eliminating, let's say, politically or business-driven kind of way of working, or we hope. Another thing that is important is that there should be recognition that the local landscapes greatly differ from each other. Therefore, we believe that the strategy should take into consideration local aspects and move away from one size fits all to rather a fit for purpose approach. we have discussed it already, but promoting smart charging and V2G solutions on the local level is key. And the way it is promoted, for example, we propose that to be in these innovative concepts should be included in the procurement, concession, or granting of aid. You can provide the incentives, but if there is no infrastructure in place, it might prove less or not effective at all. So when providing the incentives, infrastructure, included parking, sharing charging stations should be there. It's important also, as discussed before, not only to bet on affordability, but to take into consideration the actual needs, the social inclusiveness and convenience of the customer when providing both green incentives and the coupled infrastructure to this. Okay, the next slide.
Great.
Capacity building. Here we talk within the organizations, municipalities, or companies. We hear very often about the lack of the required skills at the local and regional level, but it shows again that building curricula and a more integrated skill sets is of a crucial importance also here, and that is the case for all kind of skill sets development, ranging from planners to local authority managers, consultants, and technologists. But again, here, one of the title of our webinar today is future-proof. To me, this is a keyword. Future-proof means that the charging infrastructure of the next years should be ambitious and forward-looking. That means that if you will start considering including the skill sets when it comes to for smart charging and V2G within the capacity building of the charging infrastructure in general and what you're already doing right now, this can be much more future-proof. So consider both smart charging and V2G already in the current building capacity activities or in the near future ones. Discussed already before as well, learning from the front runners, exchange and engage. This is one of the best advices that can be given, for example, to local and regional authorities. Participating in peer-to-peer exchanges, EU-funded projects, national projects, SEEV4-City, CleanMobilEnergy are excellent examples of this. But there are more and more Horizon 2020, Horizon Europe projects that are looking into this matter. Horizon Europe for the future, of course, when talking about the EU level. There is one project that has started already looking into the user experience of the e-vehicle drivers, and where they will also look into smart charging, and it's called e-charge for drivers. It's just one of the few examples, of course. Okay, and the next. Empower the consumer. That's the third pillar of recommendations for the local and regional levels. Some creativity can be applied here, but the main recommendation is to empower the consumer economically, but also in terms of infrastructure that is in place. It will very much depend on how this can be achieved, given to the local landscape. As the local landscape differs, we also, or you as a local and regional authority or local actor, should consider how this can be applied. But the main point is that the consumer should be empowered. Price incentives can play an important role here. Provision with all kind of infrastructure where the customer can leverage on is the key. We have the example of Oslo, for example, with the indoor parking garage in the very center of Oslo as a part of this project. Also the Johan Cruyff Arena in Amsterdam. Another recommendation that we have included here is to give the professional users of the electric vehicles the possibility to flexibly charge, and the structures where you can flexibly charge, and the possibility to pre-book. An example, again, I guess, from Oslo that we have within the project is the dual purpose, where the charging can be done during the day and the residential parking during the evening for the same spot where the charging is being done during the day. Though this is the overview of the local and regional level recommendations. And I guess with that, we have finalized the overview of the document. Now, the main idea would be to gather your feedback. Of course, we understand that we cannot do it face to face. That means that we have to take help, or let's say use the polls for this in order to gather your feedback. As we said before, the polls are anonymous. So just please give us your fair opinion. And I guess with that, I give the word to Jason.
Yes, so we have a variety of polls. The first one, I guess I can launch now, and then we can discuss Sabina, Richard, and myself. So I will launch now. Please feel free to vote. So what are the top enablers of smart charging and vehicle grids at EU/international level? Is it standards and communication protocols? Is it removing barriers to taxation? Is it increased sector coupling, or is it other? And if you have any other suggestions, you should feel free to put them in the chat box as well. I'm still waiting for some additional hearts and minds. Some say all of the above. Well, it's in purse. I think that's almost everybody. Okay, we'll open the poll now. Okay, so if we can see here, the standards communication protocols are quite big. Increased sector coupling and integration actually is bigger. From my end, removing taxation, removing barriers to taxation at EU level, and then some of the other things we have here again are hearts and minds and all of the above. Of course, there's no right answer, and yes, of course, all of the above would be helpful. But I think it's a no-brainer that we need to have better sector coupling and integration. You know, standards and communication protocols, of course, that's for commercialization will be huge, will be important. So yeah, thank you very much for inputting. You can also go to the next one we have. What EU policy levers are more important for the development of, more important for the development of smart charging and vehicle grids? Is it the EU mobility and energy planning, the strategy on sustainable and smart mobility, the strategy for smart sector integration, the revision of the energy taxation directive, revision of the alternative fuels infrastructure directive, or other? As mentioned, if you can use the other in the chat box as well, that would be great. we also have some questions coming in. Would I recommend EU national policymakers to support research or international knowledge transfer and dissemination on the topic? For me, I would. There are a lot of kind of Horizon Europe projects that will be looking into this topic that we would also be pushing to support. I think it is important to have more international knowledge transfer to really push EU policymakers on this topic as well, given that from our side, we have to do as much to support the sector and the possibility of smart charging a vehicle to grid in general as a potential again to reduce air pollution and increase air quality, CO2 emissions, these kinds of things. So I would recommend as well to support that.
If I may, Jason, also to pick up with this question. Basically, I guess what is also important is many might disagree with me, but I guess that there is quite some research ongoing. The problem is, how do we make sure that it is taken up to really boost the integration of all very interesting and not research that is ongoing with regards to electric vehicles, electrification, V2G, smart charging. I guess it was mentioned already before, the fact that there are different projects ongoing on this. There is also quite some know-how that is developed, but what we see is that the bottleneck is to how to boost it and how to integrate it. And this is something that is very important.
Yeah, and dissemination is an interesting word, which is absolutely critically needed, but dissemination alone is not enough. Dissemination sounds a little bit like, sometimes is, a one-way street of communication, where you actually need to filter in feedback loops. You need to have a dialogue with all the different stakeholders to actually see what might entice them, what is their perception of what a fair deal of sharing different costs and burdens, but also gains would be acceptable to them. So just by disseminating something doesn't mean that people will take it up or accept it or allow them to actually offer solutions in terms to frame it differently or draw the terms and conditions, if you like, of how this is being set up for the future.
We can now share the results of the second poll. So the strategy on sustainable and smart mobility, strategy for smart sector integration, those are, from my side, I would definitely agree with those as well. It's good to see that the mobility and energy planning as well is quite up there as well. But at the end of the day, of course, we need all of those things to be solved to support the development of the sector. But yeah, it's very interesting to see big support for those top three. We can now maybe move to the third poll, which is what subsidies and or incentives will be most effective at supporting smart charging of vehicle grids? Is it green incentives for the inclusion centrally and locally generated and distributed renewable energy? Is it subsidies to reduce high battery investment costs for battery and energy storage, e-mobility and renewable energy linked incentives, or other? As in the chat. Looking at the chat again, there's, of course, we do need support for the electrification transition, and this is still important as well as we look at EU level. There's a lot of kind of issues related to gas reform coming up now in discussion. So it's important that we keep the support for electrification and ensure that we keep this as a hot button issue with EU policymakers. Of course, we do need OEM involvement for for smart charging and vehicle to grids. Without their data from their batteries, we won't be able to, have this commercialized. I think everybody has voted now on this question. No, okay. Stop it. I guess we can end it now. Richard, would you like to comment on this poll?
Can do, yeah, if I see the results, which I can't.
Oh, sorry. No, you can start.
Okay. Right, well, interesting. So these are obviously all different ways of going about it, and what comes out top is, well, coupled incentives or linked crossover incentives, which is really interesting to see. Yeah, but it seems to be here the top favorite is renewable energy inclusion, integration in one way or another, and these are different ways, directly, indirectly. But yeah.
Great. We still have a couple of polls left to go. What is the best recommendation to incentivize local/regional governments to support smart charging and vehicle to grids? Is it improving long-term agile and integrated strategic planning with local regional roadmaps? Is it closer cooperation between public and private stakeholders? Is it transparent and open concessions that require smart charging and P2G solutions? Capacity building and peer-to-peer exchanges? Or is it something else that we have not included here? Still wait a couple minutes, a couple of seconds maybe, for some additional polls, people to vote. I think that is the most vote. I will share the results. Sabina, maybe you want to comment on the results. Interesting enough, nobody selected other.
Okay. Well, definitely, I would. Me personally, I voted for the first and the capacity building one. I believe that the problem nowadays is that the roadmaps that the local and regional authorities are adapting are very much short term and taking into consideration the integrated system approach as well as the long-term vision would certainly help the local and regional authorities to support smart charging vehicle to grid. Also, knowing that the charging infrastructure will have to be smarter. So definitely, I would say a yes. But again, capacity building, I believe it's a very, very important point in order to also develop this local and regional sustainable roadmaps.
Great. Thank you for your inputs. I believe there is still 2 more to come. How can we empower consumers and residents to adopt smart charging and P2G? Is it flexible tariffs, indoor parking garages for EVs with smart charging and P2G solutions? Is it centers for professional users of EVs, including flexible charging structures and pre-booking? Is it increased feedback by consumers on preferences, behavior, and needs? Or is it other? And again, feel free to input your chats, put your comments in the chat as well. So some of the comments we need to make clear that as well as financial, there are societal benefits that keep electricity prices lower from rising too much. We need transparency of pros and cons, debunk myths, etc. A fair reward for use of V2G. Of course, we need to either reduce energy bills or pay people to send their energy to the grid. I think we can end the poll there. Share the results. I'm not sure, Sabina, Richards, if you would like to input. For me, I agree that flexible tariffs are quite important. Richard, you're on mute.
Yeah, sorry, I would have probably predicted that outcome. I voted myself in that way. The only other thing to say on that one is that people need some level of automation, some easy way of capturing these flexible tariffs, because most people won't spend an awful lot of time if it's not convenient to actually go after these flexible tariffs. And that's maybe where, again, ICT, smart app solutions or aggregators come in again. But yeah, I think the other one is we've discussed consumers actually telling the system, if you like, and the operators and the agents and who's developing business models, what they really would like to see or go for. So all these studies in terms of revealed preferences or sometimes just stated ones are out there, and that needs to be kept going. And yeah, cities are trying to couple cars when people can't still come in with cars and group them together, including in parking garages. And if you have cars together, then of course that's a level of aggregation, and that might really help, and you might be able to turn them increasingly into solar. So not individual cars any longer, but group them together where they're stationary for a while, and then you can begin to do other things. So it looks interesting to me, yeah.
Great, thanks. So I guess for the time's sake, we'll move directly to our next speaker, move on to the program. I know we were supposed to have a break, but given the time now, I would suggest we move directly to Jordan van der Hout for the lessons learned in procuring smart charging technologies. Feel free to take over the screen. You also, yeah, there you go.
Hi, Jason, thank you. I'm going to share my screen. Unfortunately, the screen is gone we had earlier.
Oh, the screen is gone.
It's a bit odd. Are you sure I'm a presenter?
Yes, you should be able to present your screen. If you want, I can share it on your behalf. I know you've sent it to me.
Let me check if I can find share screen. I found it. Very good. If you have 1 second.
Yes.
Here we go.
Perfect. We can see your screen.
Good. I'm glad it worked out. All right. So, well, let me start. Hello, everybody. A warm welcome from sunny Amsterdam. My name is Jordan van der Hoogt. I'm an assistant technical specialist at Senex Nederland. I'm working on SEEV4-City since January 2019. And we have conducted this research in collaboration with Northumbria University and in Newcastle and the Amsterdam University of Applied Sciences. So as Robert van der Hoed already showed you, SEEV4-City has 6 pilots located in the 4 North Sea region countries, or at least 4 of them. This is an overview of the 6 pilots. They vary in scale from vehicle to home to a vehicle to city. And Lavra, or Burton-upon-Trent, is the smallest, and Amsterdam Flex Power project in Amsterdam is the largest. So I will discuss the lessons learned from these 6 pilots with different skills. The lessons are extracted from the processes of preparation, procurement, and the installation. So we identified 4 areas for the lessons learned that are technology, configuration, procurement, and the business models. So the first area is technology, where we see that V2G or V2X, the market is not fully mature. The smart and bidirectional charging technologies are still in development. In some pilots, for example, we see that newer smart energy systems are able to optimize different subsystems as a whole, whereas older systems may operate separately from each other. And therefore, the processes of procurement and installation may change rapidly. So some manufacturers are reserved on providing warranties on the use of EV batteries for bidirectional charging or the second life use of it. And it's noteworthy that Nissan is supporting the bidirectional charging technology, and it's most commonly the Nissan Leaf that is used for bidirectional charging. Also, new and second life Nissan Leaf batteries are used in the Amsterdam battery storage system. And then, unfortunately, not all EV models have bidirectional charging capabilities. As I just mentioned, mostly the Nissan Leaf is used for DC V2G at the moment, which is using the CHAdeMO protocol. The CCS protocol has the V2G on the roadmap, but that is for 2025. And bidirectional chargers are very expensive, as it are like really early products. In fact, the difference could reach as high as a factor of 20 compared to a regular EV charger. But scale of economies is reducing the price in a rapid pace, and we see that projects such as Sirius in the UK, where Senex is involved as well, they're installing aggregated V2G systems in hundreds of households. And in a matter of fact, a study by Innovate UK research shows that the cost of bidirectional chargers will reduce significantly over the coming 10 years. So continuing to the second area, which is configuration, and it became clear that every pilot is tailor-made. Some locations may already have systems that gather data, such as a PV system with inverters from a certain brand. such data systems need to be able to communicate with new equipment that is being installed to achieve the best optimization possible. Technical issues may arise when implementing new equipment that is not compatible with the existing equipment. That could occur in both soft and hardware components. An example of one of the pilots here is merging new and second life batteries at the Amsterdam Marina, which needed to be balanced properly in order to comply with the TSO regulations to deliver services such as FCR, frequency containment reserve services. And it's all functioning very good right now. So in the earlier phase of the project, most bidirectional chargers were installed behind the meter, as complying to the DNO requirements was sometimes difficult. However, in the UK, for example, the grid codes have been recently changed, and that paved way for aggregators to operate V2G units for their customers, which we see back in series, for example. And then last, for configuration, you may be working with data sensitive, privacy sensitive data. So it's important to secure and to secure the collected data, which Richard also emphasized earlier. On procurement, the knowledge of the market is key. There are hardly any companies offering a total system solution, so it's likely to create consortia for the installation and operation. The products are novel and may have long lead times. In some cases, it could add up to 4 months. And investing in human capital can improve the communication and understanding of the project among those who are involved. And this also helps to understand what suppliers are offering with all of its necessary or maybe unnecessary features. It's very good to know. And the fourth and last area is business models, where it's clear that smart charging and V2X need customized business models. Internationally speaking, energy tariffs differ per country, and each operational pilot had to deal with its local energy tariff structures. And as each pilot has different skills with different use cases, there were many different user archetypes involved that were important to these business models. Something Anna from Nissan and Robert from Amsterdam University of Applied Sciences also emphasized earlier today. And Robert also shortly touched on another point here, that users do not always understand the impacts of different charging speeds. We saw that in one pilot in Vulcan, in the Vulcan garage in Oslo, where users were allowed to choose their own charging speeds. But this unfortunately turned out to be complex for the customers or consumers. And the avoided grid investments depend on the location and are network specific. And by location, we mean per country, but also in a more local context. And right now, smart charging currently has the better business case because the units are less expensive and have a wider applicability. The several strategies of smart charging are applicable to regular EVs, whereas if we look at V2G, this requires EVs and more complex bidirectional chargers. But you know, V2G or V2X may become more rewarding in the future when the tariff structures may be altered. Who knows? So key takeaways of this presentation is that there are still hurdles for V2G implementation. Price and availability of bidirectional chargers are key barriers. And on procurement, we see that compatibility is is in general poor for this technology, and smart charging currently is currently more favorable, but in the future with lower bidirectional unit prices and more renewable energy generation, vehicle to grid still holds potential. So thank you for your attention. This was my presentation. I'm not sure if there is still if there's space for any questions. Otherwise, you can always email me.
Thank you very much, Jordan. Yes, for your presentation.
Thank you.
There is certainly potential, and we hope, at least from Polis side, that this potential will be explored further, and that there will be economies of scale applied very soon to that matter.
Yeah.
Considering the timing, we propose that we finalize with the next steps that we foresee for this document. But should you have any further questions to Jordan, we will be happy to forward them to you, Jordan.
Yeah, very good.
So for the next steps, and here, as you can see, we have also prepared one poll for you, and that is about the policy recommendation document itself. And we would be very curious to see whether it can help you and how. And if you could vote on this poll, and then we can finalize this webinar, taking your answers into account. So you see it in front of you. Feel free to vote.
Still coming in. Just 60% of people responded, so just wait slightly longer, maybe we'll get some more.
It's your last chance to vote.
It's the most interactive webinar I've partaken in. Okay, I will close it now if there are nobody else, and I will share the results.
Okay, so we see that it's going to be about bringing awareness, which is certainly a very important point, and this is also one of the main aims of this policy recommendations, is to raise awareness on the possibilities, on the benefits, taking into account the barriers, of course, as well within your organization, company, on various levels. So this is very interesting with 53%, and then to set up activities and projects. Yeah, as we said before, we expect in Horizon Europe a lot of focus on systemic approach, and also a lot of focus on how to make the energy on which the EVs are driving cleaner. So please take a look into this.
This nomination for setting up projects, I mean, one thing which people might see and explore is whether from their own resources, whether internally might work out without having to be funded externally, certain activities. That is, so what we're hoping to do is certainly work in the feedback we had today, the chat and the FNA and so on. There were a couple of suggestions there. Worked that into the draft recommendations, revised them. They will become part of a bigger document which is developing in draft and will also be shared this month. It's a full report, a policy report with a roadmap, which we're sketching out from there, which this one was just a slice, an extract of. Business models was mentioned. There's also another report coming out from the project on that. And then there's many more reports coming out, including one which Jordan and Robert was touching on upscaling and how to do that transnationally, internationally, as well as the detailed findings in valuation of every operational pilot we've been implementing and carrying out and analyzing. All of these are going to be out this month on the project website, the SEEV4-City project website.
I guess, yeah, Jason, go ahead.
No, I was just saying that thank you all for partaking in the webinar, for your excellent engagements. Thank you to all our speakers. Yeah, I think that's a wrap. Thank you very much for attending. I hope you enjoyed and learned something during the webinar.
Yeah, thank you very much on behalf of all of us, and also to mention that the recording will be made available together with the presentations. And should you have any further inputs for the policy recommendations, they're mostly welcome within the short period within next days. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye. Bye all.